If you lose one of those, if you lose your Visa card or your traveler's checks, you would call in and these reps would help you. And I realized that now what we're doing is we're solving a problem for people. We're not just trying to encode a process that existed, which is what a lot of the other software was. And so I tried to work out a way to understand what the reps were trying to get done, what their purpose was, and found out how much they interact with each other, how much they know about each other's cases, and how they can ask each other for help. Oh, I know that you had to figure out where to deliver that replacement card in that tiny town in that, far away country. How did you do it? Where did you go? That kind of a thing. So that the idea that there was such depth in those stories and such human connection was what sort of gave me the impetus to keep going.
I love that. I love that. And I think that's probably a great segue, of course, into, your recently published Time to Listen. So we would love to learn a little bit about the premise of the book. Oh, I love that you have it, of course, and why you wrote it, or any of your other books, of course. But we just love to give a little bit of a plug for your wonderful writing.
Yeah. So each of the books is an evolution on the last one. So if you're wondering if you have to buy all three, no, don't. Just buy the last one. The reason for writing it is that I don't know why, but for some reason, I really want to help everybody learn how to bring this into their own work and adapt it in a way that works for them, mainly because this seems to be such a touchstone for people. Like why they got into product or service was because they had this thought run through their head. It's like, oh, I can totally make that better for that person. And that's the touchstone. And this is such a powerful way to make that happen. So writing the book is one way. I also have a bunch of courses for people who don't, can't read a book. Myself, I can't read nonfiction books. So I'm like, okay, give me the course. That would be awesome. And I actually read one of the books aloud. I haven't read this book yet, but that'll probably happen. And so the impetus is just to help spread these ideas and techniques and approaches around because they are so integral to our core and because they have had such a track record of making a huge difference within all sorts of different organizations and in all sorts of different ways. People take bits and pieces of it and apply it and are very successful. So that's why.
I love it. I love it. And you actually started to answer one of the other questions, of course, is a little bit more about your courses and who they're intended for.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. They're intended for a wide range of, different courses are intended for different people. If you are in UX or if you call yourself a designer, all of them work for you. But if you're more on the product side, I've got a little table that shows which courses would make the most sense for you, depending on what kind of work you do as a product manager. I also have developers joining and which courses are good for them, what might help them. I also have manager level joining. So the idea is that the first course isn't actually where you start. The first course is about listening. And the second two courses are about qualitative data synthesis that's empirical, that represents other people's point of view, and therefore allow us to understand them, to build cognitive empathy with people who think differently than us, people who have different life experiences. And then the fourth course is about thinking styles, which is another way of doing synthesis, where we come up with archetypes about a person's interior cognition in terms of approaching a particular purpose. And then the fifth course is, okay, you have this opportunity map and you have these thinking styles. How do you use them? Here are all the ways that people have been using them. Help harm diagrams are in there. Gap analysis is in there. And then the sixth course is finally where you actually start, and that is framing your study. So I teach a whole course on framing your study because so frequently there's no course out there. You just kind of start doing it and you don't know whether you've done it right. And maybe it seems like things aren't coming out correctly, or they don't seem as powerful with your stakeholders as you wish they would be. And so that course is all about that.
Well, I love obviously your breadth of knowledge. It's great to know that there's so many different options. We'll shift gears here into some specific questions, of course, about interviewing and techniques. But I also just want to throw out to anyone, if you haven't already, if you have questions along the way, feel free to throw them in the chat. Some of my other colleagues at UX Research and Strategy will be kind of gathering those too. So if we have time at the end, we'll jump in with some of those. So with that, let's start diving into some meatier questions. So first and foremost, you talk a lot in your book about listening deeply. So we really want to know, from your perspective, how does this really differ than the way most maybe UX researchers conduct an interview today, say with like a discussion guide?
Yeah. So the biggest difference is that you're listening while using a sensor in your head. And that sensor in your head is sensing different things. You do not go into a listening session with a list of questions. You're not going to bring up topics. The listening session is all about understanding another person's point of view, not opinions and preferences, but their inner thinking, their emotional reactions, their guiding principles as they address that purpose in the past. And you do a listening session about that purpose with all sorts of different people. That's all part of the whole recruiting part in the framing your study. So there's this idea of the that we're gonna build this sensor, okay? And this sensor is gonna be sensing a bunch of things in the background, so you can pay rapt attention to the person, so you can really follow what they are saying. And what I want people to be able to do is to recognize that, maybe that sensor is not going to be completely built the first time that you do this, but you can still get value out of it. Okay, so I had to build my sensor, and it took a couple years to get it there. And I'm still tweaking my sensor and getting better. And the other thing that's super important to remember is that listening deeply is not something you can do all the time. It takes a lot of concentration on the other person and what the other person's saying. And what we're doing is we're sensing, like, what kind of things are they saying? Are they talking about an explanation of how something works? Or how it's done normally? Are they giving you sort of a scene, setting the scene of something? Are they telling you some facts about how often this thing happens or how often they do it, stuff like that? That's exterior layer. You need to know it, but it's not important. Okay, you need to know it just so that you can understand this person's world. And this is going to be with respect to this purpose. And I'll need to talk about purpose at some point, because purpose is really key. And it's part of the really powerful part of this. So the other thing that we're sensing is, are we listening to opinions or preferences? Sort of like interpretations of things. Somebody's like, oh, I believe that that's a wrong way to do it. And I don't care about that. What I do care about is, why is it? How is it that you built up that opinion that you don't believe that's the right way to do it? Where did it come from? And back then, what was all your inner thinking, your emotional reactions, and your guiding principles that made you form that opinion? So we're going past the explanation layer. We're going past, I'm calling it the description layer in the book. We're going past the layer where we're sort of painting a picture of ourselves. I call it the expression layer. That's the opinions and the preferences. There are shortcuts that we use to help other people understand us. Going past that, And we're going down to the interior cognition. The reason why is that this is how we actually drop our own assumptions and get other people's inner thinking. So inner thinking is basically what's that voice in your head saying? And how is it guiding you? And how is it, maybe helping you manage an emotional reaction that you've had to a particular thing that has happened or was said or that you read? How is it that you manage all of those in terms of kicking off other emotional reactions? It's all connected. And oftentimes when we're listening to somebody, they'll pop back up and then down and then up and then down. It's like a porpoise kind of, diving up for air and stuff like that. There's also this idea of memory mode versus session mode. So a lot of the time when we're doing an interview, we're in session mode 100% of the time. We are, both of us, aware of us being in an interview, and we are talking only about what's going on for this person now. And that is something that we want to be able to get past. Okay. So in terms of being able to sense when somebody's in memory mode, that's why this purpose is super important. The purpose is something that a person was trying to address in the past. And it could be as simple as, something that they can address and deal with in 1 hour, like get tickets for, some sort of a talk, like what we're doing here, right? It's a purpose, and what went through your mind as you were doing it, and all the things that came up, all the things that were going through your head. You might have had an emotional reaction to, like sometimes these things cost, and you might have had an emotional reaction to that because you're not in a great way for being able to pay right now. And so that sent off some other inner thinking about, well, gosh, I wonder, a lot of these programs have free tickets available. I want to see if they do too, right? So that's what I'm talking about. And when you did that in the past, that's memory mode. So you're telling me some thoughts that already went through your mind. Okay. That's important. We're going to fall into session mode a couple of times during a listening session, but mostly it'll be like you'll start building rapport with this person, and you might actually get a chance to, like, you two joke with each other, and you're in session mode when you're joking with each other, or making a comment about something that just happened in the globe today or something, right? That's all session mode, and it's fine. You can pop in and out of it, but you're sensing for memory mode because you want that memory mode. So that's another big difference. I have not explained yet what a guiding principle is, so I don't know if we want to do that as a separate question.
Okay, I love all of this, and I'm sorry, I was taking notes of things we should come back to. So guiding principle, I've got it down. We'll come back to that one because that sounds very, very interesting. So as a follow-up to some of this, I know, like, getting into this space, it sounds like sometimes if it's a new approach can take time. It's a little bit something you have to flex into. But one other follow-up question we had is, what happens if you're trying to have a listen deep session with someone and it doesn't really seem like they're open to chatting, or they don't reveal the information? Like, how do you get back on track without feeling like you're just questioning them?
Yeah. So one of the other things that you are sensing for is whether the person is comfortable, whether you have triggered them. You're also sensing whether you feel safe yourself, right? So what's interesting is that we're this sensor does a lot of things. And it's important to be able to get it right, to make sure that we're not stepping on someone's toes. Also, one of the beginners, when you're first starting out, you might not sense that the person's done talking about a particular topic that they brought up. And you might keep asking about it because you think, oh gosh, maybe I didn't get the interior cognition. And the other person's sending you signals that says, I'm done with this. and you miss it and you turn somebody off. But the biggest thing is that I don't ever go in cold. I always do what I call an introduction session with a particular person. And that introduction session actually helps me decide whether that person would be a good participant for the call. So, or also another thing, it doesn't have to be audio. It can totally be by text messages or chatting. It can be in person, it can be remote, whatever is the right channel for the person that you're hoping to listen to. Also, whatever is the right channel for you. I've done this with a lot of people who are deaf and have cochlear implants, and so they want that channel, but they could use some other channels sometimes, right? And so there's certain things that have to be in place for the tech to work. So what's interesting then is that we've got this idea of trying to help a person feel safe by making sure that we go and have an intro session with them first. We help them understand, this is a session where I'm just listening to everything that you thought, everything that went through your head and your heart back then when you were dealing with this. Okay. I'm also checking a little bit to make sure that they have done enough thinking about it, because sometimes you're doing a purpose where, it's something like, oh, let's take an easy one, buying a house, right? And some people are, oh yeah, I'm trying to buy a house, but they haven't done a lot of thinking about it yet. And so we will ask them, well, what went through your mind? And there hasn't been that much. And so it's not that worthwhile, either for them or for us. So we don't include them in the study. We find that out during that intro session. The intro session is also a way to make a person feel comfortable with us. I try to have the intro session, it doesn't always work, but it's great if the intro session is done by the same person who's going to do the listening session, so you've already met. And then on the day of the listening session itself, that part is a little bit established, not completely, but it's a little bit established. People have completely doubted me about this intro session thing. And they've written up some things about like, okay, I'm going to try this out. I'll try it out. And then at the end, it's always like, blow me away. This is so much better. We've got a warm reconnect. I know, yeah, it takes a little bit of extra time, but we get deeper faster. We've got such more powerful data. So the warm, I shouldn't call it the warm reconnect, because that's when you do the session itself. The intro session, when you're chatting with that person for the first time, where you're helping them understand what is this going to entail, how safe will they feel, etc., then that is powerful. I've said a lot, so let's.
Well, I think we're all just enamored and just soaking it up. But I love just hearing you talk about all of the different care and thinking that goes into this. I mean, it's not just a set of questions.
Right.
And so when we think about, someone who's really jumping into like leveraging and improving their listening skills, you've talked a lot about different ways we can do that. But is there anything in particular that if you're just starting out, like what would be your make sure you start doing this? If you can pick, I know picking one thing's really hard.
Well, I think the biggest issue is the idea that your mind is in it, your heart is in it. I have tried to teach people who do not really believe in the idea of abductive qualitative research. This is not deductive research. And they have a way of doing it where there's like, we've got these set of questions. We ask everybody this set of questions. And then we do some analysis, and the analysis button tells us what the answer is. And so that's a mindset that you have to kind of get past. Well, actually, I don't think you can get past that. If you've got that mindset, don't try this, right? I think the biggest gotcha is recognizing it is a big shift. It's a shift on a lot of different layers, but it's a shift toward our touchstone that I talked about in the very first place. This idea, like, I can make this better for people. So how can I do that, right? Yeah.
No, I think that's a great first step. And I totally see there's a ton of things coming in the chat. We see them all. We're making notes.
Okay.
And one of the ones I really love that you already kind of answered, but it's a great call out, was, there's some ones about like, what if people don't remember well? Or is there a benefit to having them do it? To your point, you mentioned other ways like diary studies to catch their impressions in the moment. Like, can you give a little context of like, how could you set up something that's a little bit more live rather than remembering?
Yeah, totally. And I've done this. I've coached with people this way. One of the things is that it'll feel a little bit like you're trying to do a tightrope walk without the net. And so it's sometimes fun to have somebody listen in with you. You will introduce that person. And then as you build rapport with that other person, the person that you're listening to, they will forget about this second listener. The second listener plays no role at all, except to be there to catch you, to give you a sense that there's somebody there catching. And so that person is actually listening, and that person is able to like step in. If you get, you might get this one place where you're like, okay, I'm not supposed to be thinking that much, just sensing. And I've got a series of techniques for questions, right, that you kind of learn. But you get to a point where you're like, I forget. And then, there's silence, and then there's more silence. You're getting more nervous. This is the place where that other person can throw a little like segue sentence for you to say. One of the easiest ones is like, earlier you said, and then you say something about a topic. Yeah. There's also, you could say all sorts of different topics. All our questions are about the topics that people brought up. And our questions would be helping them unfold for us this interior cognition. So I do things like micro reflection. I do things like just the word because. I do things like saying a little bit of, so micro reflection is a little bit of what they said. There's a regular reflection you could use. You can do things like, so where did that come from? And go backwards in time and try to figure out where that interior cognition came from. So those are a few of the techniques. They're all in chapter 6. The rest of the book is all about like, how do you figure out the purpose, and how do you keep people safe? And how do you do that intro session? So that's what I'm trying for, is that even if you start out, you can have somebody listen in, or one of the things you can do is just, it depends on the person, right? Is just really, really forgive yourself. It's fine. I've seen people even say to the other person, hang on a second. This is my first time doing one of these open-ended kind of listening sessions. Give me a chance to kind of, recollect my thoughts, and maybe you'll chat just a bit, and then you'll start feeling more comfortable. You could also just reach out to that person, use that rapport that you've built. The other thing that you're allowed to do, you're recording these things. And if you're not recording, there's a whole nother set of things you do, but you're recording them so you're not taking notes. You're not even writing down, the topics that were said, but you can write down a topic that the person hasn't gotten to that they mentioned, or something that they mentioned where it didn't feel like they went that deep and you want to go back to it. You don't necessarily write down the topic in your words, you write down a couple of their words. And so I have in some of my older books, like it's just like one sticky note that I've had for the entire listening session. And it has like, maybe 6 or 8 phrases on it. And that's it. So we're not taking notes. We're just noting down kind of like, well, you know, this person's going fast through this part. They mentioned like 3 or 4 things, and I'm going to write down 2 of them because I can't remember all of them. But later on, you're like, oh, so earlier you were saying da da, and then they'll go talk about da da, and then they'll also talk about those other things that they mentioned if they're important. Okay. One of the, this is actually another good one, is that one of the important things to realize is that when you are doing this, it's okay to be human. The other person is having a new experience too. It's okay to really touch base with them. Not in a saccharine sort of way, but just in a respect. Like, I see you, you're human, and I'm interested in connecting to you so that I can understand you better, right? Okay. So, did we resolve some of that questions about? I mean, there's actually a few other ways. I actually coach people. I'll get on the phone with them, or I'll go through transcripts.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and one of the things I did mention there was that you sit there for the whole listening session. You've only got a few phrases, right? Sometimes you have more phrases. So I've seen people like write a ton of phrases. It's not wrong. It's just that you're going to miss some of the stuff that they're saying, and you can get better. It's not wrong. The other thing is that you never end a session. So a session ends when the other person ends it. And you do the traditional, well, was there anything when, we did this intro session and you were thinking about this coming up? Was there anything on your mind that you thought we were going to cover that we didn't? Half the time they'll bring something else up, right? But it's their topic. It's not our topic.
Yeah, I love all of
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And really does, I mean, I think put them a little bit more in the driver's seat of it's their experience. We're just here to witness, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the idea, is to give them, to build their trust in themselves to go deep. And sometimes you'll lose that and then you'll have to build it again. But yeah, it's just forgive yourself. Be very forgiving. It's okay. And sometimes, I've even had a bad day and I'm like, oh my God, I'm just not into this. I only do one of these a day. It's too hard to do 2. Unless you like team up or something and switch off. So the 2 of you are doing 2, which is the same thing as one person doing 1. So, so don't sort of like button yourself up and say, okay, I'm going to turn Indi Young off and only be robot researcher, because Indi Young has moods. Indi Young is tired. Maybe Indi Young needs to postpone this one, right? Because I'm not going to do a very good job of paying attention. So you're part of the equation. And the value that your organization's going to get out of this in all those other stages of this depends wholly on how many concepts at the interior cognition layer you get you help that person unfold. For a typical listening session, we'll get between 40 and 120 concepts. Someone's just starting out might get 30, maybe 40, maybe 50, and also there's other variables that affect that. There are some topics that are just not that deep. You don't do a lot of thinking about it. And so, wow, getting 40 in the one session is pretty decent. But there are some, like I did a study with people who are entrepreneurs and founders of companies. And oh my gosh, there was so much deep on their minds and so many. I can't think about patterns when I'm in a listening session, but when you're out of it, you're like, wow. It's like they were talking, they were concerned about this too. Pretty cool. So the patterns are something we do in the qualitative data synthesis. It's the second step of that. But what we're doing is we're generating all of the, I don't know, you could use the analogy of soil so that you can grow your vegetables in it. It's rich.
So changing gears a little bit, not super far, but I know since, I mean, you're talking about just the amount of insights you get. And I know a lot of us in the UX research space are asking, how do we build a panel or a pool to go back to? But like in this space, like how do you start building a true, maybe not a traditional panel, but how do you really build that group of individuals that you may need to go research for? If it's this kind of longer process of intros, like how do you go about finding individuals you think would even a match in that intro process?
Right. Yeah, I talk about that a lot in the course. I mean, it's as unique as your org. So one of the things is that I have not ever had very good luck with recruiting agencies because they're recruiting, most of them are market research recruiters. And market researchers only care about the demographics. And as soon as you start asking them to recruit by a thinking style, they're like, oh, no, we're not going to. Yeah. And I've never had a market research recruiting firm complete a recruit for me in all the years I've done this. And so I've always had to complete the recruit myself. And by doing that, I've figured out some ways to do it. It is as unique as the purpose that you're studying. If your purpose has to do with a service in the physical world, you're going to recruit in the physical world. You're going to use physical things to recruit with. You're only going to use digital recruiting if your product or service is completely digital, right? You're going to use your network of people to put physical signs in the physical world at the correct places to see if you can connect with people. And one of the things that I teach is that by and large, people are interested in talking to you, but they're not interested in it if it's hard. And so if you try to get their attention by sounding like a researcher, you're not going to find people. I like to talk of it as like this person is a butterfly. They're in the physical world. They've landed here momentarily to do this other thing, has nothing to do with you. They see the little call to action. They're like, huh. And then it looks hard. So they flutter away. Because I call it you're writing paragraphs or whatever. I call it barfing on the butterfly, because you've just made it too difficult for them to want to participate. A lot of follow-on, like that's just the finding names. And then the follow-on, like, are you of this attribute or this attribute or that attribute? Because we've got these attributes that we want to make sure that we're covering. In addition to these thinking styles, oh, you can barf on the butterfly there too. And you don't want to. So I'm like, okay, you're not allowed to ask them more than like 4 questions. Okay. And you can't ask them like long paragraph questions or, anything like that. So it's, that's an interesting approach, I think, is that we don't, so that's the, where it came from, which was the market research recruiters. There are recruiters out there that do user research now, and they might be more amenable to the kinds of things that we want to do. One like the market research people, they have their own databases, right? And if I'm asking to do an intro session with people to decide whether or not I want them, they're like, oh, no, you can't have access. So I'm like, okay, fine. Just recruit, twice as many people and we'll pay for them all. And then I'm going to go through and take half. Right. I think that there's a chance that our user experience recruiting services will do a better job. But I don't know. Do not use social media unless it's your last resort. And if you do, I mean, unless it's about social media, then yeah, awesome. But if you do, don't include people that are like within your 1 or 2 degrees different network, right? Do you want people outside of that because that network influences their thinking or the likelihood of it? Yeah.
Yeah, that's super great advice. And the chat is blowing up about Barfing and the Butterfly. Apparently, it's going to blow the day. We love it.
Awesome.
So continuing a little bit on the recruiting train, one of the other questions we had was, when it comes to recruiting with this type of, I mean, if you're getting quality insights, do you have a typical right number, or is it really also like it depends on the questions you're asking?
Yeah, it does depend on the questions I'm asking. It depends on several variables, which have to do, and it's in the book actually, which have to do with the breadth of the purpose. So the purpose can be like that little hour-long thing is very well defined, or it can be really large or it can be too large. Okay, and so that's going to affect the variable of how many people you want to recruit in the beginning. There's another couple of things that that affect it, but while I'm on that topic, you will learn how many people based on the listening sessions that you have. Okay, so there's been lots of studies I've done where I'm getting some recruits in, I start doing some listening sessions, and I'm like, you know what? We have defined this too broadly. So let's go back and recruit again. Let's reform what our qualifications are, or what are the thinking styles we want to recruit for, et cetera, or some other aspect of it, the purpose itself, right? But the idea is that you're sort of going to add people because we weren't seeing what we had expected in those first 3. That can happen after the 7th person. It can happen, it can, you just always want to put a finger on the pulse and like, am I getting what I expected? And can I go forward with this? So the recruiting variables are variables that establish that initial, like, I think we're going to recruit 12 people, but it's not necessarily gonna be 12 people, right? Yeah, I think that that's a hard thing for some of our stakeholders to understand. So the idea of it being changeable might not be something you tell them. Keep that to yourself. And then, if something happens, it doesn't always, but if something happens, you're like, hey, we need to recruit a few more people. And then they're a little happier about it, I think. Yeah. I've got my cat here asking for dinner if you can hear her.
I appreciate that. Mine was at the door probably 15 minutes.
Yeah.
So I know a couple people had this in the chat too, but one of course, the questions we always get as researchers is, how do we show that we're measuring value, especially if it's going to take a little bit more time doing it in this way? When we know it's important, how can we show some of that value to our organizations?
Yeah. So I'm going to ask you to describe the question a little bit more, because I think show value can come in so many different flavors, and you may not know how to describe it yet, so we'll just pick one.
So I think the questions coming from the chat are, more probably around how do I convince my organization it's worth it to do it?
Okay. Yeah. So we're actually going to do a workshop in January that is called "Persuading," with air quotes around it, your stakeholders. It's with Dewan Stanford, if you know him from Design Thinking. He has had a lot of experience. But basically, and I know Erica Hall has been talking about this also, it's like, you're never going to persuade them. You can maybe shift their mindset over time, but that's going to require a relationship. That's going to require building trust. Okay. So building relationships is how you get political currency within your org. And I know a lot of us, like me, especially, I'm like, oh, office politics, I don't want political currency. Well, you got to have it if you're going to do this sort of thing. I mean, in my case, I always get to work with people who have already bought in. So I haven't had to do it as much. That's why I'm working with Dewan. That's why I did a whole bunch of research myself with past clients. I was like, how did you do this? One person was, she was doing, I think she must have been like pretty high up in the website side of things. This was a couple decades ago. And there was a customer service center. It was a telecom company. And what she did was she went to the yearly plan. There's a word for it. General plan for the year. I don't know. Where's all the budget going? There's a whole ton of budget going to the customer service center. She knows the customer service VP, had already started developing a relationship with that person. Goes to the customer service VP. Hey, I'd really like to do a study that would get us this kind of knowledge, and I think it would help your group as well. Done. Here's some money. Right? It's all predicated on the fact that there was that relationship. That one person also said, getting like an executive in your side. There's a phrase for that too. I'm not remembering my colloquial phrases this afternoon. In your pocket? I don't know. That sounds weird. So building relationships, recognizing that an executive wants to feel, this is an emotion, they want to feel safe with a decision. How can you make them feel safe? You can say, hey, here's 3 different people who have done this. Here's 3 different examples. Here's 3 different people saying something about it, like a leader in that field, someone who's just kind of in a business like you, and someone who is a professor, or something like that. So that's another thing. I don't know what Dewan is going to tell us in our workshop in January. I have the link. No, I don't have the link. I have the card set up on my website, but we have not set it up yet for signups. So stay tuned if anybody's like, oh yeah, I gotta be there. But the long way of building relationships and building political currency in your org is what's going to win. I think that this is something that, I don't know, a lot of us are sort of coming into this field because we want to help people. We want it to be easier for them or more powerful for them, or we want them not to be forgotten. And we're also somewhat like that ourselves. We're also somewhat, just in general, averse to like doing things the way the typical or the old hierarchy, right, used to be. And we have to play these games and feels false, but we can make it less false. We can make it a human to human connection within our org. We can do this by listening deeply.
Great. I think it is hard, right? But to be part of that change is an important impact.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. So we have one more question from when we'd asked and sent out questions ahead of time, and then we'll dive into some of the other follow-ups from the chat with our last few minutes here. But one really, I think, unique question we have is, what if I work where I don't actually maybe have direct contact with my users or my individuals? How can I build, some of the artifacts we talk about?
Right. Yeah. So I've heard this question a lot. And the first question that I ask is, let's find out why you don't have contact. Okay, don't accept that as a given. Just because somebody somewhere said no, there's a reason for it. Find out the reason. Do some listening sessions with those people who have said that. Build relationships with them. build trust. If they trust you, then you might be able to get in touch with those people. And another thing to say too, is that often the reason is that, oh, they're our customers, we can't mess them up. And when you're doing listening sessions, when I help people frame a study, I'm like, you cannot recruit more than 50% of your panel from current customers. Sorry. But that's not going to work, because the people who have selected you already are probably of a certain thinking style, or probably already have a relationship with you. And they will think of this from the solution point of view. And we would rather that they think of this from their purpose point of view. So recruiting people who are already, users, is fraught. I once was doing this. It was, believe it or not, with people who work on oil wells drilling. And there was one person who had been using the equipment of my client, and had all these issues with it. So, I wasn't doing the recruiting then. I used that time to listen deeply, to build rapport, to show that he really had my ear and that I'm understanding what he's saying. And after half an hour, he was so impressed. He's all like, I feel heard. Okay, what did you really want to talk to me about? And I'm all like, I actually don't want to talk. I want to hear more about. And then I had some topics that he brought up. I want to hear more about what went through your mind when you did that. Like, what went through your mind, not just the complaining part of it, which is, like the top exterior layer, right? But what went through your mind? Let's ladder back and go to other places where other things went through your mind, and how you were comparing them and how they were clashing, and all of that. I want to know that. And this person just loved, like, we had a very long session. But that's sort of what you end up with. It's not bad. It just might take a little bit longer. And you will use that time to build trust. There are situations where you just can't build trust. There are situations where you just can't do the recruiting. And try hard to do an intro session. Try very hard to do an intro session. If you can't even do an intro session and you've got a person on the phone, I know this is not really the current question, but it is a thing. Like, if you don't have control over it, but you are getting people to talk to, try really hard to do an intro session. Tell your stakeholder, hey, I have to explain to them what to expect, right? I want to set up the time. Maybe I want to find out that whether audio is right for them, or whether they want to do it by some sort of chat or text.
Yeah. And this is actually a great segue.
Leveling up the the request for food.
This is a great segue. One of the questions we had in the chat was about establishing and maintaining psychological safety for your participants in this framework. So are there any other guardrails that you think any interviewer should be mindful of?
Yeah, I have a whole chapter. I have a chapter for outside versus inside. And it's very complicated, but when you first start out, you might not be sensing it. It's one part of that sensor. It's like, is this person feeling comfortable? Can I pick up on any hints that they don't want to continue in this vein? I have a friend visiting who teaches all of these courses in Spanish, and she was telling me about a listening session that she did and picking up on all these things. Then we were chatting with a third party there who's not a qualitative researcher. And she had asked me a question. I hinted at her that was the wrong direction. I didn't want to go there. And she picked it up and went a different direction. And the third person's like, how come you did that? So it is a skill. You may not have it right now. You may have it a little bit. But this is why one of the things that in the course I help people do is learn how to practice in the real world. Now, practice is not a listening session because that's hard. It's like I call it like a heavy hat. You got to put a heavy hat on, and you can't wear it for very long before your neck gets tired. You got to build up your muscles. You got to build up your sensor. You also have to be in the right, frame of mind. I have done listening sessions at the airport just for the fun of it because I like to connect with people. But sometimes you're really tired at the airport and you're like, not talking to these people, even though they're having a really interesting conversation. So the idea of sensing whether another person is feeling comfortable is all about the words that they're using, the hesitation, the circling back to an earlier topic, the maybe tone of voice. And tone of voice is different for each person too. So it's not like, okay, if it's this tone of voice, it's, it's bad. We can't say that, it's individual, right? So it's very, very much about paying attention. And that's why I talk about listening as having a little sensor that you can you build that sensor up. It's there and it'll like poke you when you're like, oh, look, they're hinting at some interior cognition, but not really getting there. I got that poke. That's the hint. That's like what I call a pull tab. I'm like, oh, I could pull that open. I could pull that open with, one of my question techniques to see if there's anything that they're willing to unfold about their interior cognition there. That sensor's also going to go like poke, poke, eventually, like they've said, okay, that means something, I think, for them, right? So wait a minute, what do I do with this? Let me just pause for a second. Let me just like do an earlier you said, and then maybe approach this again. Or maybe I'm built up my skill enough where I can take that and say, okay, yeah, we've been at this a while, haven't we? Or, oh, that sounds like it's a little bit of an emotional topic for you. By opening the door like that, and I can't do it as well as a psychiatrist can do. But opening the door gives the person permission to say, yeah, it's a lot of emotion. And you can say, depending on their tone of voice there, like, well, let's not go there. Right? Make that decision for them or offer them that decision. Well, we don't have to go there. Right? It's individual. It's also individual to you. I've got a bunch of demo listening sessions where you can see 3 different people doing a listening session, and they're very different. You bring yourself to this. You bring yourself to the other person. So I think the biggest thing that I want to say is that most people, when they try it, they say it's fun. Because in a way, it's allowing you to bring yourself to something that with a formal interview, you don't often get to do. And a formal interview might still be the right thing to do for an evaluative solution framed study. I'm sorry, yeah, solution frame, but you could actually frame an evaluative study by a purpose. And you could do a listening session. So, I'm not saying do this and all those other research approaches are bad. It's just that this one feels so good because you're working on connecting to that person, on hearing that person, on sensing that person.
Yeah. It's honestly, it sounds very inspirational for someone who does a lot of sessions. It sounds right. It sounds wonderful.
Yay.
So some of the other questions, if you have a few more minutes.
Yeah, sure.
We have are really around like, okay, now that we've done the session, right? What's your process? One of the questions is, how do you decompress from that? And 2, then what are your next steps for like really getting through to analysis? Like, how do you go back? What's your typical process?
Yeah. So what I typically do right after a listening session, and remember, I'm only doing one a day. I give myself 20 minutes and I write down the inner thinking, the emotional reactions, and guiding principles that I can remember. Okay. Just to touch base. just to give myself, I'll write a few down and then I'm like, oh yeah, and then that went back there and then that branched there. That's about it. Oh no, wait, that branched over there, right? And you're feeling that person again. You're sort of like simmering in that person. Okay, that's not necessarily what helps me decompress. But this idea of being able to digest slowly what a person said continues through the rest of the day. It continues through the rest of the week. I still remember people that I've listened to from 20 years ago because I connected, right? Also because I've worked with the data afterwards. So what happens is I take the recording and give it to a human transcriber. You need a human. I'm hoping everybody's already convinced of this. Not only does it get you a more powerful transcript that is on tone, and they can look up, some words that are unclear, or even look up a 3-letter acronym that the person used. It's not important for us to understand to get their interior thinking. There might be some that we need to know, but some of them we don't, and that person can sort of unfold it for us. And it gives that person a relatively good job. And I like keeping people employed with relatively good jobs. As we all know, running a recording through an AI transcriber is never perfect, and it is devoid of tone. I want bracket laughter, right? That's what I want. So if you're going to run it through that and then try to transcribe it yourself, you're probably going to pull your hair out. I don't recommend transcribing on your own. Just hire someone. It is not expensive. Okay. If you were out consulting and you were charging $200 an hour and the transcriber costs, it'll be by the piece, but it's generally about $100 or $150. It's like, oh, I would have never been able to transcribe that in 1 hour. So there's your value. Also the value of giving other people jobs, yay. So that's the next thing. I get that transcript back, and that's when I do step 1 of the 2-step data synthesis process. Just like we have 2 steps for data analysis, it's 2 steps for data synthesis. I have the 2 courses for each of those steps. And the first step is going through and pulling out the concepts at the interior cognition layer. So I'm going to pull out an inner thinking. I'm going to pull out an emotional reaction. I'm going to pull out a guiding principle. Oh, here's another inner thinking. Oh, here's another emotional reaction, but it seems like 2 emotional reactions. Maybe I need to untangle it into 2 emotional reactions. Here's an inner thinking. Wait, that's an emotional reaction. No, it's an inner thinking, that kind of thing. So you're untangling things, you're finding them. This is where I get that count of 40 concepts to 120 per transcript. And when I'm pulling the little snippet out, I then summarize it. I am carefully crafting puzzle pieces so that in the second step, we can put the puzzle together. Okay, the puzzle is the patterns. If we want, so qualitative data is just like quantitative data. It's got a subjective end and it's got an empirical end. And if we want empirical data, we need patterns. And so that second step is finding the affinity, the patterns. If we don't have patterns, then we've probably framed it badly. And those carefully crafted puzzle pieces in step 1, they go according to a certain formula where you're using some of their words and you're having to create your own words for certain other parts of it because they didn't say the word, they implied it. Most commonly, like when I'm trying to summarize an emotional reaction, it's going to start with a verb, feel, and then the emotion is going to go right after it, and then the key point. Oh, in so many cultures, we do not say what we're feeling. We imply what we're feeling. So we have to come up with an emotion and put it in there. That key point. So if I'm summarizing an inner thinking or a guiding principle, it's the verb that they're doing, the thinking, right? What is that thinking about? It's like, hesitate about sending my kid to this camp because, blah, 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 right? Well, hesitate would be a great verb there. We don't always say the verb, so sometimes we have to come up with the verb. And then we have the key point right after it. So the key point is, what am I hesitating about? I'm hesitating about sending my kid to the camp because of X. And there might be some other supporting details, like because X is like, I'm hesitate to send my kid to the camp because it's a bunch of water games. And while he likes water, his best friend doesn't, and his best friend won't be able to go with him. Right. So there's some supporting details. When we go and we look at the puzzle pieces to put them together, we're just looking at the verb and the key point mostly. And we're asking, what was the intention behind that? What were they aiming at? What was the focus of mental attention? Like, why was this something that they were thinking? What were they going toward? And it would be a subpart. It turns out to be a subpart of that purpose. We don't know what the subparts are. We build this data from the bottom up so that we can represent other people's interior cognition in patterns. So that's what I teach in those 2 courses, is how to do the data synthesis. I just updated the Listening Deeply course and course 1 of the data synthesis. I'm in the middle of rolling out course 2. The first couple of videos are going to come out, I think, next week. And these courses, they're like, between 20 and 50 videos per course. So little videos you can consume. But the next thing after that is thinking styles. I remember when I said that I write down, some concepts that I remember in that 20 minutes right after the session. I'll use those to help me focus on the 3 or 4 interior cognition concepts of that person in that purpose. Like if it was an airline passenger and the purpose was get to the gate on time, what are the 3 or 4 concepts that are like top of mind, like that they talked about a lot? And those will come out in that list usually. Okay. Thinking styles are built of patterns between those 3 or 4 top of mind things. So they are styles of approach or philosophical approach to the purpose. And you could be a different thinking style in a different context. So the passenger is a super easy one. Like you could be on a solo trip to go see your best friend who just had a baby. And on your way there, you're like, I've been so busy at work. I've gotten the plane and I'm going to finish knitting this sweater for the baby. Right? So you're going to try to be productive, and being productive is one of the thinking styles for passengers. When you yourself take a trip with your family and maybe you've got kids, you might be in a different, there's a thinking style that's about like, put a bubble around us so we don't disturb other people. There's also a thinking style about put a bubble around me so that other people don't disturb me. So that's what, and then we use those thinking styles to try to understand in an opportunity map, how are we supporting people? Are we supporting one thinking style and not another? That happens a lot because we assume a thinking style. Are we writing scenarios with a particular thinking style? Name one thinking style. Right? Name maybe 2 different thinking styles and they're traveling together or something. How would they be different? How can we support them differently? So the whole end game is to build support that's as varied as the thinking styles and as varied as all the towers that show up in an opportunity map. So that's the idea, is that we're at the stage now where, okay, yeah, we've gotten so far with design, and tech has influenced design quite a bit, but we haven't really paid attention. And there's this vast horizon ahead of us of opportunity to pay more attention to the more ways of doing this and more thinking styles about it and more different sub approaches to it that we can support. And wow, that's going to be so cool and so amazing. Um, Not only for the people that we're helping, but ourselves too. But, this is what I want to leave our next generation. So they have something to step forward. I mean, they can take it any direction that they want, but there is this idea that we've gotten free of the mucus of this idea of design in one way, and there's one solution for everybody. So, yeah.
Okay, another wonderful little snippet, free of the mucus. I love, I think we're all going to be like, this is the best. I love all of your just descriptive language. So last question, I think, for the night that really, I think you've already started to touch on this, talk about how do we make sure our orgs see the value of this work. But I think when you talk about how open-ended and how many opportunities there are, I think a common question we've kind of seen threads throughout the comments is, how does a person really help their organization maybe fund or allow this type of research when it's not connected maybe yet to a specific product or solution? We don't know. We just need to go out and ask.
Yeah.
Any final kind of tips or thoughts around that?
Well, I do try to connect it to the existing solution. So when I get those puzzle pieces together, they form what I call, it looks like a city skyline. I call it a mental model diagram. It's a bunch of puzzle pieces that have affinity for one another. And so we label that affinity, and that becomes a tower in a city skyline. And then those towers tend to have affinity for one another. It's growing from the bottom up. The other towers have other puzzle pieces, other summaries in them. So each of the windows in a tower is a summary. It's a person looking out. And so those towers come together in blocks. And just like in a real city, sometimes those blocks grow up into neighborhoods. Not always. Sometimes there's like a block over there that's not in a neighborhood. But what we do is we take the existing capabilities that we have, our services, our solutions, whatever we want to call them, and we try to align them underneath the towers. And when we're doing that, we're asking the question, was this really built for this? Or was it built for like a more wishy-washy sort of generic part of it? Or like, was it built for these 5 towers together and we're actually only supporting this one? And we can do a better job because there's gaps under there. Or was it built for this one thinking style in all 5 of these towers? And we have some opportunity for the other 2 thinking styles. We'll go one tower at a time. We never look at the entire city skyline at a time. We just look like there's those 5 towers, and this is what our stakeholders are interested in right now. You give the stakeholders like 2 or 3 of those to choose between. And you can also do a help harm graph. I've been posting about layers or levels of harm. I made those levels up because we need to start somewhere talking about it. Maybe there's better levels of harm documented somewhere else. And I'm all ears. That would be great to know about. But this is the idea of mild harm being the thing that our organizations only pay attention to. Is the person frustrated or confused? And can we make it better? But we get into more serious harm. We get into lasting harm. There's even systemic harm. And what does each of those towers, that's the frame for how we measure what we're doing to support that tower. So we're measuring our existing support under that tower. Is it supporting the tower itself? Is it supporting all thinking styles in that tower? We can even measure ideas that we have coming down the pike. Where's that idea fit? Is it supporting all the thinking styles that we want it to support? Or we don't have enough bandwidth to do all the thinking styles, so let's just do one. Okay, we made that decision. We know that there's other ones out there, but we're aware of it now. We're not just like sort of putting the blindfold on and going like, oh, that's our user, right? So the idea is that we can use that opportunity map to compare what we're doing and how we're supporting people in a variety of ways with the gap analysis and with the help harm diagram. measurements. And the nice thing with the help harm measurements is that those are measurements coming back from evaluative studies. And if you frame the evaluative studies by that set of 5 towers, it's very easy to layer that data back in. And so now you're all like, oh, hey, now I can even do generative studies. I can do ideation and co-creation based on a subset, rather than having it so open-ended that you're like, okay, we're going to co-create about women having babies. And it's like, wow, that's big. Okay, how about we look at a set of towers and we just look at that? And we've got all this knowledge layered in there. So we can use that knowledge to figure out what we want to do in our co-creation, or how to frame it, or who to recruit to join us. You can use it in a lot of different ways.
Well, as always, this was amazing. I know we had so many other questions, but we are at time. Anything else, Indi, that we didn't ask you today that you wanted to give a quick shout out to? Otherwise, I mean, it's been wonderful to have you.
Yeah, it's been so wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for sticking around, and thank you for spreading the word. I've talked about, I think, Dewan's persuading stakeholders workshop that's coming up, and I've talked about the courses and the book. Oh, here's one. And of course you're going to inundate me with emails, but I've got a Slack workspace, and if you're working in this kind of thing or just wanting to start it out, I'll add you. Just let me know your email address. I may not get around to it because everybody's writing to me very quickly, but yeah, that is the thing that's been really helpful for people, and they ask and answer each other's questions. I'll answer questions there too. So that's kind of a fun one.
And so now we are really in what we call the happy hour section of our network. Making sure that we really can just take some time to anyone ask questions, any thoughts from our sessions. So definitely go ahead and use like the raise hand feature. If you haven't used that before, it should be down in your, I believe it's your reactions section, that you can go raise your hand. But if there's any questions, feel free to throw them out, and we'll just kind of have some conversation for the next 20-ish minutes.
I can ask a question as a novice, if you don't mind. I was just listening to people in our networking little group. I got people's email to reach out to them because I'm just doing an online course. I have an engineering background and I'm learning UX research. It's an online course through Coursera. It's a Google course, which I'm really loving it. And now that all tech companies are laying off people, I'm like, okay, good. Now it's getting more scary to find a job. So anyone who loves to help or have ideas, or wants to drop your email or contact so I can reach out and talk later, or if you have any ideas now, I appreciate it.
Ideas or feedback on what?
Yeah. On how I can get a job. Like I'm doing just one portfolio, one project. Like do I need to do 5 or 6, or like what else can I add to this? I know Photoshop. I have done a bunch of, like, I don't know, some, let's say, book design or cover pages, stuff like that I can add to my portfolio to show that I have a sense of understanding this. But that's really minimal. So is there any other stuff that I can add or do? Online courses, anything is welcome.
I would say be open-minded to contract work, because that'll open doors for you. It may be a short-term contract, but don't think, it's a good way to get names on your resume and to get some quick and dirty experience usually. So be open-minded when the contracting, the recruiters call. And even if it's only like 6 months, it's something. And if you're real world.
And if you're working now and it's not an income thing, but you just want to transition, doing some pro bono jobs on the side is a good way to get experience and build a portfolio. And then you can actually look for, to leave your job and get a paying job.
Yeah, that's another one I was going to mention too. I think that's a great idea, especially if you go to like a smaller nonprofit organization or even a small business and, offer
Awesome. Thank you.
this initiative.
I will add on the top of discussion is that, I have always learned this thing from the weeds, right? Regardless, you have a portfolio or not, it's very important that you do try to see the connection dots, how human make decisions, what happened at the cognitive level, and how it is connected back to the UX, right? So I would highly recommend reading out, do the Google keyword search as how human make decision, look at the models that they have, and then see how it is comprehending towards cognitive system of UX research, right? Because I feel like when we learn about the perception, the psychology behind it, that's how the magic creates. And then it opens the door towards what's quant versus qual and what methods goes under each category. So a little bit more academia also would help in addition to the course that you're taking to make your technical strong, right? Because I came from the engineering background as well. Then I shifted to my cognitive science UX, and that exactly I followed and learned. So just thoughts on the technical piece of it. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, Elizabeth, I see you had your hand up, and Josephine, I see you. We'll get to you next.
I had a question for Indi, and of course, there were so many questions she couldn't have answered them, but maybe all of you might have some ideas. So my question was, when you're dealing with enterprise users, just getting an interview with them is difficult a lot of times, because especially the higher up they are, the more difficult it is to get time with them. So I'm wondering, to actually do an intro session with them and then an interview. I don't know if any of you had heard of doing an intro session. I never had. I've done like a warm-up session to kind of go through my discussion guide, but that's not with a real user. So I was just wondering if anybody has ideas how you would approach enterprise users to get them to agree to more than one session.
Elizabeth, I can talk a little bit about it because I have experience with the enterprise users, right? So enterprise user, sometimes people at the VP level or at the executive level, right? Sometimes they're not the direct user, but they are part of the user domain because they're overarching the other user's world, right? So one of the practice that I have involved, when I invite them in the invitation to be in the room, that invitation is not at the research scripting language, right? So what I have done is like, I've definitely introduced myself, just like an intro, but I also mentioned that why I am here and which team I belong to and what we are going to understand. And I portrait myself as a student, because think about it, right? If I'm doing this research with a doctor in that organization or in a VP person level of the organization, right? I need to also portrait my message such a way that I am new myself to the domain, and take it yourself as a teacher. So teach me what it takes to working in the domain or the product, right? That actually has caught so much attention from my users who are in the enterprise level to really say yes or no. Of course, timing is a variable there because I cannot have sometimes 45 minutes with them. I only have 30 minutes or maybe 20 minutes the max. So keeping the question to the critical area that you want to touch on first would definitely help the priority. But the most important is how you craft the email so they feel interested by the subject line and who you are. So that has definitely worked with me in the recruiting. And also, as Indi mentioned, 8 to 12 users in the domain, I first go with the 8 to 12. I don't go to the batches of 20 people send the email and wait for the reply, because I'll tell you, I wait for a week of the break to get the recruiting done. Sometimes it is challenging, but that message portraying really has helped. And also follow-up reminder to see, hey, would you be still interested for this research? We are really excited to learn from you, blah, 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 and go from there. I don't know whether it helped or you have already tried this method, but this is one thing I'm really trying into my wordings, what I put in the email to help me out with recruiting. Just a thought. Thank you. You're welcome.
I just want to follow up because I'm about halfway through Indi's book. And when she talks about an info session, I don't know that she was super clear about what she means about that. And so an info session is an initial session that you will have with that participant to get to know if they're going to be an ideal candidate. Like, right. How do they feel about thinking deeply? Are they capable of doing that? Do they want to do that? And so when Indi talks about an info session, it's kind of like a little like mini kickoff or mini getting to know you. And so that's a little bit different than like, what an info session might be in other contexts. Specifically in Indi's context, it's an initial meeting to to flesh out if it's a good fit for them to continue
Right.
with the research session.
Right. That's what I thought. It's sort of like taking your screener and making it like a
Live thing.
session.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. Yeah,
Right.
exactly. And kind of getting to know them, getting to see, because how many times have you had an interview with somebody where they weren't a great participant? They're like not super chatty, or they're too chatty, or, so gauging what that communication is like, and especially with what Indy's talking about listening deeply, is if they can get into those different like hard candy layers that she talks
Right.
about in her book.
Right. I was just wondering though, how you convince busy people, especially like, I was thinking when I was working in healthcare, nurses and doctors, how you can convince them, especially, and when you're not remunerating them, how you can convince them to do that, and then if they turn out to be excellent, to come back for a second session. So that was my only concern.
Yeah, Elizabeth, I'll jump into previous healthcare professional. So I totally get it. It's hard to get into those spaces. And I don't think there's probably an end all be all answer depending on the org, and I would even say culture is part of it too. One thing we used to do with our nurses, with the org I was with, is, meet them where they're at and help understand the problems that are important to them, to build that relationship. So we started building cohorts of individuals who understood why we would come in, starting with the problems that were most important to them and working our way into problems that maybe were more important to the business. Because then we already had the relationship, they knew we'd make a difference. If that makes sense, like, oh, it's worth our time to talk to you because you'll actually change things that impact us. I wouldn't say it worked 100%, but it definitely got us, I would say, a pool of individuals who at least we knew would be honest with us and share when we had a question and needed to come knocking.
Right.
Then you still also have a little bit of a bias because the same people you're asking, but we got at least people to talk to.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
All right. Josephine, I think you had your hand up.
Right. Yeah, thank you. There are so many things happening here in this exciting meeting, and a lot of different questions at different levels and answers at different levels. It's really, participation is great. So what I wanted to say is that if you're relatively new to this field, and I think I might have put it in the chat, I encourage you to consider attending the Monday afternoon free workshops that Jared Spool is hosting at 2:00 Eastern time for about an hour and a half on a variety of very pertinent topics related to the UX field. And I don't work for Jared. I don't get paid by Jared. I learned about Jared in 1997 from another human factors engineer when I was working on a pilot project for AT&T. And that's where I first learned about Jared. And it was years after I got my master's degree that I found out about Jared. But he's really someone you can learn a lot from, in my opinion, and like that. But I wanted to say something about, someone brought up a topic about something about, it was a hint at like, what should I do in the near future? And so because I have a bit of a foot in the futurist camp, and what I'm looking at, and this was mentioned in the workshop today, is how some tech firms are laying off and others are not. And what was discussed was like, well, is there anything that distinguishes the companies that are laying off versus the ones that are not? And the ones that are like not laying off UX people are the ones that have already demonstrated the value of UX particularly UX research, in their organizations already. So it is what I would call an enrollment conversation. And it, we don't work in a vacuum. We can be servant leaders, we can be UX leaders, we can have positive visions of the future, we can build relationships. And those are all the things that we need to do in order to have those conversations that demonstrate the value that UX research provides in an organization. And there has been some work that was done to look at, well, where are the layoffs occurring? Where are they not occurring? And so that's a hint. And then there's also probably going to be renewed interest in UX metrics in the coming year, because that's about scalability. And so we have to really, we need both quantitative and qualitative methods in order to not just get at where are the pain points for the users, but what's going to scale, because that's what executives, that's what's going to give them a feeling of security and safety. Can we show that, we spend our money here, it's going to save us money down the road, like that. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, does anyone else have another question or any other? Jake, I know we've been talking offline. I think you might have had one. I saw you go off mute, so I'll let you go.
Yeah, but I didn't want to interrupt. I'm sorry about that. I'm still developing my online etiquette. Apologize. No, this was actually probably one of the more, just like between the topic session and the breakout room, so much variety of both perspectives and a lot of interest in methods and ideas about ways to get at the user needs. And one of them that came up in our group was around participatory design and co-design. And it seems like just in the last week, I've gotten into like 4 different conversations about that. And I haven't talked so much about participatory design since, I don't know, graduate school. But I was just curious, given the audience that we have left over, how, how interesting of a topic is, or how familiar of a topic is participatory or co-design with the researcher, kind of at least researcher lens on. I don't want to take it away from like design thinking, but I'm just kind of curious from the researcher perspective, is there a lot of experience or interest in learning more about that? Because that could be like a really good panel topic. It could be something that we could just kind of bring in to do a deep dive on how to actually approach something like that for those who haven't done a ton of it.
And I'd like to add to that, as a former designer who did research, who's done a lot of co-design and design thinking facilitation and participation, I'd love to understand how, as a researcher, just a researcher and not a designer, working with designers, we can do that and not feel like we're encroaching on their territory.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good call out. And also, just for anyone in the chat, we did throw, if you think of anything else, there's our thoughts on today's event, but also feel free on our social media, our Slacks, if you think of other things you want to hear from us. This is all for you. So we love to just make sure that we're doing things that are relevant. So any other, I know we're coming up on time here, but any other thoughts or questions?
One quick thing to Neha. People are interested in getting your LinkedIn, please. Go ahead and respond. Hey, where are you? Your LinkedIn.
Sure, I'm just typing it. I just saw the chat. I'm typing it right now. Thank you.
Yes, and I think it's Leaders of Awesome.
Hey, Elizabeth, could you put your LinkedIn? Oh, sorry about that.
I did, but here it is again.
Thank you. Got it.
Thank you. Thanks, Elizabeth.
I have a question.
Was Indy supposed to talk about what she thinks of the democratization of UX research across organizations? I thought I saw that somewhere, or maybe I'm confusing that with another event.
I don't think we had that specifically on the agenda. I think it was more focused on, a little bit more focused on her book for this time around.
Okay.
I think it might have been one of our previous events. I'm spacing on it. Like maybe the last couple ones, the democratization topic has come up a couple of times. But yeah, I don't think so for this one. Are you looking, or do you have any specific questions or thoughts or ideas around that?
Well, no, I was just wondering what her perspective is on it. Just because I've heard different perspectives on it, and it's a mixed bag.
Okay. Yeah. Did she provide like a LinkedIn or something? Did she provide a LinkedIn contact for did she, Jen?
I don't know that she did, but I will find it and I will put it in the chat right now.
I'm sure she's got a perspective on it, given the kind of work that she does.
Okay, thanks.
Oh, by the way, for the Slack team, I put my email on the chat. I don't know if you guys are collecting those. Okay.
We don't collect there should be a link in the, if you look in the chat, I can find it again. We don't do that ourselves. We ask that you fill that in because we won't find it again. I will put that in the chat. The chat again. Just give me one sec.
Cool, thanks.
Sure. Here we go.
Any other burning questions?
Is there any alternatives to Maze for prototype testing?
User testing. I don't know I was just having this conversation with a friend the other day. I don't know the pricing differences between Maze and user testing. There's user Zoom as well.
Yeah, I think they're owned by the same company now, aren't they?
Yeah, they did. They are in the process of merging. Yeah, you're right.
Has user testing put out their subway map?
They did. I just saw that. I'll find
Not
it
a
again.
subway map this year, though, is it? I think it's something different.
Yeah, I don't. Is it user interviews that puts it out? I think.
Yeah. You guys clearly know what I'm talking about, but
yeah, they did just release it. I'll throw that in our Slack channel.
Yeah, that's what I grabbed, Kevin, because you can take a look at that. They in past years have provided their spreadsheet of tools that they evaluated to create their maps, broken out by different stages. Like if you needed it for a research repository, or you needed it for usability, or you needed it for recruitment. And I've always found that a helpful starting point. I had to go find a new tool.
I appreciate it. Could you repeat that name one more time?
User interviews. It's a company. I just saw it on LinkedIn. I don't know who reposted it, and now of course I'm not seeing it. It is user interviews, and you watch LinkedIn, I'm sure it's going to be posted quite a bit because I think it just came out recently.
Yeah, there's the 2021 one. I love that. But this year, I think they did something really different. I haven't even pulled it up yet, but I think it's like a map, like
yeah, usually it's like a tube map.
Yeah.
The text looks like, the font looks like it's a treasure map.
Right? Like, yeah, it feels more like.
Okay, somebody just threw it in the chat. So there you go.
Appreciate it.
Do you like how I can't actually describe a map? I'm finding a map. It's great.
Thanks for sharing that, whoever did that.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Denise. Good to see you or hear you.
Yeah, it's been a while.
It has.
I work West Coast hours, that's why.
There you go. Middle of your day, practically. No,
yeah. No, you're spot on.
Hey, I have a random question for those that remain. Anybody know any American researchers who have relocated to Australia or New Zealand?
I will if you're hiring.
No, but I do know an Australian researcher who might know of some because he's pretty involved in the UX research community there. He's in Sydney though, so he might know if there's any Americans that have relocated just because he just knows community well down there.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'm talking to Canva right now and I'm thinking about it. So
Okay, John, hit me up with a message on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And I will introduce you to Adam, and you can. And if he doesn't know, he might not. I mean, that's my guess. Best guess is like, oh, this American's here. So
And then
I
when you're
don't.
building your team out, call me.
done right. Yeah. Thanks, Jen.
Sure.
Quick question. Any workshops, online networking in UX research that you guys know, like there are good groups or names or websites, you can put it in the chat. That would be perfect. I appreciate it.
For what?
Just the same thing we are doing tonight, Q&As, workshops, networking. So I want to learn, I want to be exposed and learn and hear more things. So if you guys know any established group that I can join or follow, let me know.
Yeah, we're on Eventbrite, but there's loads of groups, especially don't discard local organizations as well. Local UXPA. I know there's one in Minnesota, UXPA Boston, UXPA New Hampshire. Austin has a big thing. Kristen, what else is going on out in California?
We used to have in LA, but since relocating to Sacramento, I actually don't know what's going on in San Francisco. Where are you located in Cave?
Bay Area, San Francisco.
Oh, Googling will find you so much.
Or just go on Meetup. Go on Meetup and put out UX.
Eventbrite.
Yeah.
Because I was checking Eventbrite. Yeah, Google.
I had a question. If people have they ever used Indi's Slack work channel? She mentioned that at the end, and I wondered.
Didn't even know it.
Yeah, does anybody know what that is, or what the Slack, the name of the group is? I actually haven't been to her site, so maybe it's easy to find.
That's a fair question. I don't know, Kristen. I haven't seen it. That was the first I'd heard of it as well.
I lost my Slack on my phone. Give me a minute. I added something and everything moved.
So is that UXPA org? Is that right?
So UXPA is an international organization,
okay.
And then they also have local branches. Several cities have local branches.
Okay.
Austin has a big one. I know Austin, Texas has a big one.
Is this the right thing? You see that?
I can't see it.
I don't know if you see.
I can't see that too. Sorry, it's too small for me.
Oh, okay. It's like a green.
But if you go up, you should go up on Meetup.
Yes,
go up on Meetup. But that is the logo. But then there's local branches that you can, go on Meetup, and that they generally don't cost anything to join.
Cool.
I'm trying to think. I know Boulder has a group. I mean, not necessarily UXPA, but Boulder has. I think Cleveland has a local UXPA chapter. If you go on the UXPA international website, I think they list all of their local offices too. So that might be helpful for you.
Cool. Thank you.
There's also a lot of ladies that UX chapters, local chapters, London, Dallas, and you don't have to be a lady to join their events. They are definitely men friendly. So just don't go in there hitting on ladies, but be, I mean, if you did, it'd be weird, but they're men friendly as well.
Great, thank you.
There's also a lot of meetup groups on specific tools. I know that there's been Sketch meetups, Figma meetups. I don't know if you're interested in design or if you're more focused on research, but there's I've definitely seen some meetups.
Miro just had their conference.
What was the last one? The conference?
MIRO. Miro. It's a tool.
The whiteboarding
tool.
Got it. All right. Thank you, guys.
Mhm. Is Emily still here? I don't see her. Maybe she got knocked off. Okay, so if we don't have any other last minute questions or comments, should we call it a year? Happy 2002. Thank you for joining us for our last event of the year. Appreciate that. We've got some good stuff cooking up in the new year. Got some great events coming up. A couple in January, I know. World IA Day will be, I think, in February or early March. I can't remember. I think I'll be doing a workshop perhaps on spontaneous talk frameworks, maybe. And we just got a lot of stuff cooking. So follow us on our social media channels and join us, sign up for our mailing list. Those are going to be the best ways to stay on top of what events we have coming on. Yeah.
Can I just say
Elizabeth?
something? I just want to say, I don't know how long I've been coming to these meetups, maybe this past year. I just want to say, I think this is one of the best groups, the best professional groups I've ever attended. You guys do a phenomenal job. Not only do you get great speakers, but I just think the way you handle the meetings and everything, I think is really great.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Always love having you here, Elizabeth. So thank you. It means a lot. She keeps coming back, so that must be a good thing, right? Must be doing something right.
You are.
All right. Thank you. All right. Well, everybody, I'm going to sign us all off so that we can complete our day. Thanks again. Happy New Year, and we'll see you in 2023. See you later.
Thank you, guys.
Bye. Thank
Happy
you.
holidays.
Bye.